Right now, I'm up in one of my favorite places, the high Uinta Mountains, and I'm just up here messing around. And while I'm up here, we're going to talk about the Lost Rhoades mine, and I'm going to give you my theory, and it's just my theory, on where I believe it's located at. And at the end of the video, I'll give you 3 reasons why I believe this. And my theory is based primarily on a specific geological feature you will find up in the high Uinta wilderness area. While we're talking about this, I'm going to show you different footage of the high Uintas. So those of you not familiar with this part of the Uinta Mountains, you can kind of see what it looks like, and this way you get a good feel for the area we're talking about. For those of you not familiar with the Lost Rhoades mine, there's some minor variations of the story, but the gist of it is basically you had this very rich deposit of gold that was being worked by the Spaniards. I believe probably in the late 1700s, and the Ute Indians ended up chasing the Spaniards out of this area. And then sometime after that, you had the Mormon pioneers come out west and settle in the Salt Lake Valley. And one of the prominent Ute Indian chiefs by the name of Chief Walkera ended up converting to the Mormon faith. And he allowed one of the Mormon leaders, a gentleman by the name of Thomas Rhoades, to remove gold out of this deposit, not for his own benefit, but for the benefit of the Mormon church, which was struggling financially at that time. Thomas ended up becoming ill, and his son, Caleb Rhoades, was allowed to remove gold out of this deposit. Caleb Rhoades ended up passing away in 1905, and he took the mine's location with him to his grave, and people have been searching for it ever since. And unlike most treasure stories, this one does have some historical evidence to substantiate it. So I do believe it's a real mine. And before we get talking about it, we're just going to go over some very basic geology on how gold is deposited and the type of rocks you can find up here in the Uinta Mountains. On this beautiful rock that we call Earth, there's basically 3 classifications of rock. The first rock is sedimentary rock. And all sedimentary rock is you have a deposit of sediments, and then you'll usually get specific minerals that'll mix in with it, usually calcite and silica. And these minerals act as a bonding agent, like a glue, and the sediments will start to cement together, and then they'll turn into a rock. And this process over long periods of time can happen over and over again, and you'll get what's called bedding planes and different layers of strata. And the Uinta Mountains is kind of unique, where it consists primarily of sedimentary rock. And the type of sedimentary rock you'll find in the Uinta Mountains is you'll have your limestone, your shell, sandstone, and different type of conglomerate type rocks. And lucky for us, you will find gold in sedimentary type rock. The primary method would be quartz veins. And this process I'm going to describe for quartz veins, this applies to all of your different types of rocks. But all a quartz vein is deep within the earth, you have these magma chambers. And right up above the magma, you'll have groundwater, these deposits of water. And this process is called hydrothermal circulation. And how it works is the magma will heat up this groundwater. So this groundwater becomes very hot. It's superheated. And as this groundwater's rising to the surface of the earth through different cracks and fissures, all of the minerals that it comes into contact with, it will dissolve and absorb. So this fluid is very mineral rich. Think of it as like a mineral soup. And as this fluid gets closer to the surface, you have a process called precipitation. And as it gets closer to the surface, it starts to cool down, and the gold will start to drop out, and the other minerals as well, and they'll deposit on the surrounding host rock. So as this fluid is going up through a crack and the gold drops off, it'll deposit on the surface of that crack, as will all the other minerals. And this process will repeat itself over and over and over again. And as these minerals get deposited in this crack begins to fill up until it's all the way solid with these different minerals. And that's what a quartz vein is. And how I like to think of a quartz vein is it's like an elevator that the earth uses to bring minerals up from down below to the surface. And always remember, with the quartz vein, the nastier, uglier, darker looking quartz, that's the quartz you want, because that's very saturated with different minerals. Another way you can get gold in sedimentary rock is envision like you have this ancient river, and on this ancient river or stream or whatever, you have a bend. And then up here, you have this, this super rich gold vein on some cliff edge. And this would be called a lode deposit. And then you have different chemical and physical type weathering, and this gold becomes dislodged, and it makes its way into the river, and it floats down the river, and it gets trapped right here in this river bend. And that would be what you'd call an alluvial type deposit, a placer type deposit. And say over time this river dries up or changes course, and you have the right conditions, and all those sediments found in that river bend start to solidify, start to harden, cement together, and turn to a rock. And in this case, it'd be probably like a conglomerate type rock. Well, that gold gets trapped in that sediment. And so that's another way you can have gold deposited in sedimentary type rock. The next type of rock, you have what's called metamorphic rock. And to think of metamorphic rock, think of metamorphism, like where you have this caterpillar and it changes form and it turns into a butterfly. And so metamorphic rock, you begin with an already existing rock. So you have a rock and you apply heat and pressure to it. Now the rock never melts. That's important to understand. It does not melt, but it will change form, and it'll turn from one type of rock into an entirely different type of rock. A good example would be limestone. If I had a chunk of limestone and I apply the right amount of heat and pressure to it, that limestone will change form and turn into marble. In the Uinta Mountains, we do have metamorphic rock. You have your quartzite formations like your Uinta and your Red Creek, and you also have slate. And you will find gold in metamorphic rock. Over in Colorado, there's a metamorphic rock called gneiss, and they've had really good luck, the old timers did, of getting gold out of gneiss. I found 2 mines where they dug into an outcropping of gneiss, but the main method would probably be quartz veins or igneous intrusions, which brings us up to the third type of rock, igneous rock. Igneous rock, and this is the topic of this video, igneous rock is most definitely a gold-bearing rock. Most of your beautiful mountain towns, these high elevation towns that tourists flock to, they all began because some old crusty prospector found a super rich deposit of gold in some outcropping of igneous rock, usually in a quartz vein, or they found a large deposit of gold in the contact zone. And igneous rock, how it works is it's all, think of like volcanic. And so you have this molten magma in the earth, which is super rich in different elements and minerals. And as this magma comes up to the surface of the earth, it starts to cool down, starts to solidify, and starts to turn into a rock. And we call that type of rock an igneous rock. And if this rock is formed below the surface of the earth, it forms very large crystals, and it's classified as intrusive. And the reason it forms these larger crystals is because it has a surrounding rock to insulate it, so it cools down a lot slower. If the rock forms or cools down and forms above the surface of the earth, it forms a lot smaller crystals, and it's classified as extrusive. And these crystals make igneous rock very strong. They kind of like interlock together. And so more than likely your house right now, if you have like a rock countertop in your kitchen or in your bathroom, it's probably an igneous rock more than likely. granite. And another interesting thing that igneous rocks will do, and this is what we're going to be focusing on today, is say you have a crack in the earth, a fault, where you have two large bodies of rocks and the earth's moving and shifting and it separates, right? Well, the earth doesn't like these cracks. It wants to fill them in. And so this molten magma will come up, fill in that crack. As it gets closer to the surface, it'll start to cool down, solidify, and harden, and turn to an igneous rock. And then what'll happen over time, the surrounding rock, and this is called your country rock, it's usually a very softer material. And so over very long periods of time, this surrounding country rock will start to erode away. And that'll leave what looks like a wall of rock. It looks like a gigantic vein of rock. And that's called a dike. And in this case, an igneous dike. And prospectors love an igneous dike. Some of the most richest gold mines in the world have been found near these dikes in the deposit areas. And so igneous rock, it was believed there was no igneous rock anywhere to be found in the Uinta Mountains until 1894. And in 1894, this myth was almost busted when you had this very short-lived gold rush that occurred up here in the Uinta Mountains. So in 1894, you had this very short-lived gold rush up here in the Uinta Mountains. And there's a guy named Dale Bascom who wrote a book called Following the Legends. And in this book, he dedicates a chapter to this piece of history. So if you want to research it further, that's probably a good place to start. But basically what happened was in 1894, you had this man by the name of Enoch Davis. And Enoch was an inmate at the Utah State Prison, and he was on death row for murdering his wife. And he was in the process of trying to appeal his case. So Enoch was a very desperate man. And at this time, Enoch was alleging that he knew where a very rich gold mine was located on a dike way up in the Uinta Mountains. And not only that, but he was claiming that the mine that had been rumored Caleb Rhoades was working in secret, that mine and this mine were one and the same. They were the same mine. And it turned out that Enoch, the way he knew about this mine was he grew up around the Rhoades family, and he was childhood friends with one of Caleb Rhoades' boys. And they grew up together. They were buddies. And then later on in life, Enoch would find himself working at the old military post in Fort Duchesne as a blacksmith. And Caleb's son came along. They were kind of reminiscing. I imagine Caleb's son got caught up in the excitement. And at that point in time, he took Enoch up to the high Uintas and showed him this gold mine in this dike. And so what Enoch did was, his cellmate was getting ready to be released from prison. And so he worked out a deal with him, and he drew this guy a map to the mine and tried to explain to him how to find it. And the condition was this guy was supposed to take half the gold and pay Enoch's attorney fees, because Enoch was going through the appeals process and trying to get his case overturned. And the rest of the gold that was left over, Enoch wanted that given to his kids. And then this other guy, he could keep the other half for himself and do whatever he wanted with it. But unfortunately for Enoch, this cellmate of his who got released from prison, he was not very competent, and he had a big mouth. He talked too much. He was trying to recruit different people to go up there and help him find this mine, which is a big mistake. And there was a newspaper reporter who worked for the Vernal Express newspaper, and he caught wind of this secret gold mine located up in this mysterious dike up in the Uinta Mountains. And this newspaper reporter started publishing all of these very sensational type articles about this gold mine. And of course, this attracted a lot of attention. And that year, you had upwards of 700 men living in the high Uinta wilderness in these like makeshift tent cities, looking for this mine. And staking claims all over around this dike. And these men came from Salt Lake, Denver, Cheyenne, and all the way from Helena, Montana. And then you started getting businessmen that started going up there from Salt Lake, and they started plotting out the town, and it was going to be the next boom town of the West. And they even had a name for it. They were going to call it Hillsdale, Utah. And then Vernal, Utah and Green River, Wyoming started getting into like a little bit of a competition, because both of these towns wanted to be the town that was going to build the road up to Hillsdale, this new boom town, you know, so they could supply the town with all their needs. You know, it was going to be good for business. And then for whatever reason, it just died off. And I think what probably happened was a lot of these men that ran up there, you know, they got caught up in the excitement and thinking they're going to strike it rich. And they probably didn't even know what they were doing. They didn't even know what to look for. And then the reality kind of kicked in, and they probably started missing their families, and they knew they had all these chores back on the family farm that were being neglected. And so they went home, and the businessmen and types like that would have quickly followed. And this left your diehard prospectors. They would have stayed up there. And diehard prospectors like that, they're a very secretive bunch. And I imagine they sunk a lot of shafts into the contact zone in this dike. And unfortunately, we'll never know what they found. But my friend Clay, and I did a video on it, he went up and showed me one of their old cabins. And it's a beautiful cabin. And so men, like this prospector that built this cabin, they continued to work this dike in secret, clear up and until the 1970s. There was a man by the name of Howard Ritzma, and Howard was a government geologist, and he lived right here in Utah. And he was fishing on the White Rocks River, and he looked down into the river and he saw an unusual looking rock. And so he grabbed this rock out of the river, and it was an igneous rock. And up to that point in time, it was always believed there were no igneous rocks to be found anywhere in the Uinta Mountains. And so Howard theorized that this rock must have came from a different mountain range. And some guy found it, thought it was pretty, threw it in the back of his pickup truck, forgot about it. Sometime after that, went fishing on the White Rocks River, and one of his kids, you know, climbed in the back of the pickup truck, grabbed the rock, went down to the river and chucked it into the river. And that's how this rock was introduced into the White Rocks River. But Howard had issues with that because the rock showed a lot of erosion from tumbling a very long ways down the White Rocks River. And to make a long story short, in the 1970s, Howard came into contact with some prospectors who lived in Vernal, Utah. And these prospectors were working this Igneous Dike up in the Uinta Mountains. And they brought Howard some samples of the rock. And in case you're wondering, it's Diorite and Gabbro. The diorite's not your typical salt and pepper color. It's a very gray color, a dark gray. The same thing with the Gabbro. The Gabbro will range from gray grain to your typical darker colors. But with these rock samples, Howard was able to get the authorization and approval he needed to go up there and research and document this dike. And so Howard, some other government geologists, and at different times they would take geology students from the University of Utah, you know, I'm sure to do all the grunt work, but they went up there and did their field study on this dike. And I was able to find their reports, their pictures, and most importantly, all of their assays. And during the last ice age, as the glaciers came over, they broke off top pieces of the dike. And so there's certain areas where you have a lot of float rock. And then as the glaciers retreated, they deposit a lot of sediments over certain areas of the dike. And so the dike goes like this. It'll surface and then dip into the earth, and then surface and then dip into the earth. And up there in the high Uintas, the dike runs for an estimated 25 miles. And on average, it's about 20 feet thick. And these assays that they did on the dike, they did a total of 13 assays. They found lots of minerals. It was very rich in aluminum and very rich in titanium. And in the report, Howard even comments on how surprised they were of what the high concentrations of titanium clear across the dike in all of their assays. The dike's full of a lot of iron, quartz. There was one area of the dike that Howard outlined on his map where there was a large deposit of limonitic soil. And limonitic soil is soil that's basically so saturated in iron and some other minerals that it turns like a yellow color and nothing will grow in it. But they only did one assay for gold, which is very weird. When you discover an igneous intrusion like that, that's never been documented, and they did 13 assays for all these other minerals, but only one assay for gold, is very strange. And I've given it a lot of thought, and the only thing I can think of is I think they didn't want to find gold, they being the USGS. During this time, and this isn't in the report, this part, this is just my speculation, but during that time, there was a big movement to designate this entire area as a wilderness area. And that movement was successful. And I think it was 1984, give or take, somewhere around there, when that entire area was by law designated as a wilderness area. And so I think that's why they didn't want to find gold, because if they would have found gold, it would have severely have complicated that. I don't think they would have been able to designate it as a wilderness area if they would have found a large deposit of gold. But the one test they did do for gold and silver did come up positive in both, but very small amounts. The silver was 1/2 ounce per ton, and the gold was significantly less than that. If I remember, I think it was only like 1/1000th of an ounce per ton. But you got to keep in mind with assays and gold, like say this is the dike and they did their assay right here and it registered low in gold. Well, you can go 300 yards down on the dike. Keep in mind the dike runs 25 miles and it might be super rich in gold. I mean, at the end of the day, gold is simply where you find it. And so, very interesting feature. And they keep this dike secret even today. If you go online to the geologic maps, they will show the dike on some of the maps over towards the Colorado side. But when it comes to the high Uintas, they omit it from the maps. It's not on there. And I think they do that because they don't want to encourage illegal activity. They don't want people going up there and illegally mining. But I'm going to give you my 3 reasons on why I think this is where you're going to find the Lost Rhoades mine. All right, this is my 3 reasons. And the first reason is, and it's the most important reason by far, is the geology. The Lost Rhoades mine, it's an amazing claim. We're talking about an abnormal deposit of gold. And for an amazing gold deposit like that, you need some equally amazing geology to support it, to back it up. And with this igneous intrusion, you have that geology. When Howard and the geologist did their field study, they admit, even in the report, they couldn't survey the entire dike. They just didn't have the manpower or the resources to do that. But I think with what they had to work with, they did a really good job. But as far as they could tell, the dike begins in Lador Canyon in Colorado. They found a small outcropping of it there. And from Lador Canyon, it heads west and it follows the Pot Creek Fault. And from the Pot Creek Fault, it heads straight over to the Dyer mine. And in recent years, prospectors have found a small outcropping of the dike near the Dyer mine. And this explains the Dyer Mine. And the Dyer Mine is a limestone formation that was very mineralized. The primary was copper and the secondaries were gold and silver. And keep in mind, limestone does not naturally contain gold. Gold has to be deposited in limestone. And so more than likely, the Dyer Mine was in the contact zone with this igneous intrusion. And to understand what took place at the Dyer Mine, we have to look at the research done by a man named Dr. David Alt. And Dr. Alt was a professor of geology at the University of Montana, a very well-respected geologist. He authored almost 30 books on geology. He passed away in 2015 at the age of 81. But up in the Bannock Goldfields in Montana, you have a similar situation to what you have at the Dyer Mine, but on a much larger scale. And you have this limestone deposit coming into contact with an igneous intrusion. And right there in the contact zone, they pulled out a lot of gold. They were pulling gold out of those deposits for almost 70 years. That's how much gold was formed. And so David was really curious, what's the special relationship between limestone and igneous intrusions? And what David found was, as you have this molten magma from this intrusion coming up from the earth, and when it comes into contact with limestone, there's a very intense reaction that occurs, and a wide variety of minerals are created to include gold. And this molten magma, it'll form this outer barrier, this outer layer that separates it from the limestone. And this would be your contact zone. And he found that these contact zones with the limestone formations were very saturated in minerals. And he found that your likelihood to find gold in these particular deposits was very high. And David went on to find the same pattern occurring over and over again in the gold fields of southwestern Montana. And so the Dyer Mine, that's just a taste of what you're going to find up in the high Uinta wilderness area. From the Dyer Mine, the dike continues west and it heads to the Ashley Twin Lakes area. And from the Ashley Twin Lakes area, it heads up into the high Uintas. And from there, it follows a series of faults for about 25 miles. And this is where the dike shows all of its glory. This is where you have the major outcroppings. This is where the dike is most intense. And this is more than likely where you're going to find the lost Rhoades mine. And it's probably going to be right in the contact zone between limestone and this intrusion. And I imagine that's right where you'll find the shaft. And this explains your Mormon gold coins. See, up there in the Uintas, it's going to be the opposite. It's going to be the inverse of the Dyer Mine. Gold is going to be your primary. Copper is going to be your secondary. It's going to be more similar to what they found up in Montana. And your Mormon gold coins, they are very valuable today due to their scarcity. But back when they were in circulation, they were being devalued, especially in areas outside of Salt Lake. And this was because of their high concentration of copper. And the Mormon church was often accused of debasing its currency, but they weren't. It's just that Thomas and Caleb Rhoades had taken gold out of this deposit, which would have naturally had contained copper in with it. And for that matter, I don't believe Thomas or Caleb were ever, hard rock mining. Neither one of them, as far as I know, had any experience or background in hard rock mining. And hard rock mining takes a special skill set. If you're not careful or you don't know what you're doing, you're going to get hurt or killed very quickly. Thomas Rhoades did work in the gold fields in California, But those were placer deposits. Placer mining and hard rock mining are two totally different things. I believe the Spaniards probably did the work for them. And inside this mine, you probably had a lot of stoping that had occurred. And stoping is when, say you have your mine shaft, and you'll dig into the vein on the side of the shaft, kind of chasing the vein. So think of like small cavities or small rooms outside of the main tunnel. And you can get away with that as long as the overhead rock will support it. So there's probably a lot of stopes somewhere near the entrance of this mine. And Caleb and Thomas were simply just, and in these stopes, you know, the Spaniards had stacked all of their high-grade ore, and they were just stacking it there until they were happy with the amount they had, and then they would take this ore to their smelter sites to process it. And so Caleb and Thomas were just going in there, probably digging through these piles of super rich gold ore, grabbing the best pieces and just chucking it in their saddlebags. But keep in mind, it doesn't have to be in limestone. That's just my theory, and I base that on the Dyer mine, and I base that on the research done by Dr. David Alt. It could be in any formation. I mean, it might be in a Uinta quartzite. It really doesn't matter. These igneous intrusions have numerous ways where they can deposit gold. You can have metamorphic gold skarn deposits, which are very rich deposits. When you have the molten magma coming up, and say it cools down too quickly, you get large cracks in the rocks, and these large cracks will fill in with different minerals to include gold. The dike itself acts as like a dam because it's igneous rock, and so your surrounding country rock, any gold or minerals in there will gravitate towards this wall of rock, and it'll get trapped right there. So right in the contact zone, you'll get large deposits of gold potentially. You have porphyry type deposits, epithermal type deposits, and a lot of stuff that goes way beyond my expertise. The Rocky Mountain West has a track record of these igneous intrusions depositing a lot of gold all up and down, and I assure you the Uinta Mountains will prove to be no different. The second reason is the location. These areas are very remote. When I was a kid, we used to have horses, and we would take our horses up there, and my dad would take me and my brothers and my uncles would go, and it was a blast. Some of my best childhood memories. This is very remote, rugged, and beautiful country, but it's very inaccessible. When Howard and the other geologists and the university students were up there doing their field work, the Utah National Guard took them in there in a helicopter and dropped them off. They would do their field study. They would pick them back up again, take them to different locations, and that's how they got around. And that's because this area is so remote and hard to get to. But it's because of this remoteness. This is why all the countless hundreds of people who have searched for the Lost Rhoades mine has never been able to find it, because it's hidden up there in this very rugged country. The third reason we'll call like more circumstantial evidence. And you have like Enoch Davis and all that drama that unfolded. And then you have Caleb Rhoades. Caleb Rhoades had left a few subtle clues regarding the location of his mine. And if these clues are to be believed, they either directly or indirectly point right to this dike, even down to the very color of the rock. And there's one clue Caleb gives where he talks about his mine being in this rock outcropping, and this rock disappears and then resurfaces a short time later in a grass meadow, you know, like a grass field. Then it kind of goes along this grass field and disappears again, and then it resurfaces over by some cliff or something like that. Well, what he's describing is the dike. That's exactly what the dike does. And so, you know, ever since I'm a kid, if you grew up here in the Uinta Basin, we've heard of these stories and legends about the Lost Rhoades mine ever since we could walk. And I would love, just for once, for somebody to actually find this mine, to validate it, and to give it its proper place in our history book. It's a very colorful mine. It has a very colorful and interesting history. It really does. And so, you know, I hope this video helps you out. And if you do find it, if this video helps you find the mine, I don't want none of your gold. That's yours. You earned it. And that's not what motivates me. But do this for me. Send me a picture, because I want to know if my theory about the limestone is correct. And I would just love to see what type of rock this deposit is found in. And of course, you know, I'd love to see pictures of the gold. But I wish you the best of luck.